one of an NDSU professor, Dr. Barney Geddes, was leading a project where he was planting peas in lunar regolith, which I think is fascinating that you can grow peas in lunar soil. Anyway, that lunar regolith is developed by an organization called Exolith Labs. They're doing some really interesting work in kind of around this idea of exciting agriculturalists through space. So with that, I want to welcome up Stephen and Annalynn with Exolith Lab.
So Exolith Lab is a not-for-profit organization that specializes in making regolith simulants. Our goal is very simple. It's to make space accessible to everyone on Earth by enabling educational opportunities and space development. To reach that end, Sorry, what was that?
Oh, nothing. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought you were stopping us. So sorry about that. But to reach that end, we provide accurate lunar, Martian, and asteroid regolith simulants to scientists, educators, and literally anyone that is interested around the globe. Regolith is the top unconsolidated layer of any planetary body. It's pretty much everything above the bedrock. And these simulants are made to match the mineralogic and chemical compositions of the regolith present on any celestial body that we have data on, like the moon, for example. And it's all collected by NASA and other scientists, and sometimes high school students like many of you. But so why do we actually need regolith simulants? We can't just move to another planet without preparing and expect anything good to happen from it. Unfortunately, we're not all as good as Matt Damon from The Martian. In terms of agriculture, we can use these simulants to understand how to sustainably grow plants in the regolith present on those planetary surfaces, making all of our mistakes without ever having to leave Earth. Regolith on other planets kind of sucks for plant growth. It's alkaline, nutrient poor, and it contains a lot of plant toxins. So we have to remediate it to mimic Earth's fertile soils as best as we possibly can, if we want large-scale agriculture on other planetary bodies. The problem is that as the pH drops towards acidic levels by adding that organic matter, all of those heavy metals and other toxins are suddenly more bioavailable to the plants, as bioavailability of nutrients and toxins generally increases as pH drops. So what can we do about that? Well, we have to learn how to remediate it using plants, microbes, worms, and likely all three and more to remove those toxins and add nutrients at the same time. As mentioned, the lunar regolith is full of heavy metals like chromium and many others in extremely high concentrations. But these metals are toxic to the plants and to us if we eat them. So it's really important that they're removed prior to growing for agricultural purposes. And when we're talking about Mars, it's actually even worse. The soil is full of perchlorate salts, magnesium sulfate salts, and others that will cause osmotic stress, killing the plant before the actual metal can do so itself. And if all that wasn't enough, the regolith is so fine and it compacts so easily that even when amended with organic matter to improve that texture, it still compacts super easily. For example, or for sustainable agriculture, we'll need a way to keep soil aerated without disturbing the roots and causing undue stress to the plants being grown. Space agriculture at Exolith is relatively new. It's only about a year old, and we've had a lot of failures that have guided us to the work we're currently doing now. So right now we are growing beans, a nitrogen-fixing plant, and comparing their ability to fix nitrogen into the root zone of lunar regolith against the same simulant with just a top layer of worm cap or artificial fertilizers, and then watering them all with the same amount. Small amounts of those samples are currently being analyzed for nitrogen concentrations, so we don't have that data today, unfortunately, but we are already growing French marigolds in each of the samples. And while the marigolds are going to be short-lived as we are destructively sampling them for biomass to use as a proxy for nutrient availability, it is likely that availability of and concentration of nutrients will go hand in hand. But it is still possible that the alkaline pH of those lunar simulants will inhibit the nutrient uptake for the marigolds. So just because the nutrients are there doesn't necessarily mean the plants can still use it. But simply adding nutrients is not enough for every plant, though. As shown in a pilot study that we're currently conducting at Exolith, that was initially meant to understand the ability of worms to prevent the uptake of heavy metals by radishes. We planned on growing these radishes in 4 bins filled with 50% LHS1 and 50% composted horse manure by volume. 2 of the bins would have worms and the other 2 would not, but they would all be sown with 12 radish seeds. Most of the seeds in the 2 worm bins germinated within 4 days. However, in the wormless bins, almost no radish seeds sprouted, and those that did took 15 days longer and are barely growing. They honestly look a little sad. And the reason being soil compaction, as we mentioned earlier. The worms are able to aerate the soils and prevent compaction, not only allowing the seeds to germinate, but allowing the roots to actually develop and extend out through the soil media so the plants can support themselves and uptake more water and nutrients. But we have a lot more planned for plant growth in the future, and we've actually been gifted a redwood clone. So keep an eye on our socials for those announcements and any updates on that. But now for Annalynn.
Hello. So Stephen did mention earlier about different remediation methods used on Earth, and we can use these same methods to remediate on the Moon and Mars to remove any unwanted elements in the regolith. One method that I was particularly interested in is the use of compost worms. So vermiculture is worm composting. It introduces worms into a compost to break down further, for example, food waste. This routine creates a sustainable agriculture practice by converting organic waste into nutrients. Worms are very small creatures, but they're super fascinating, and they're also known already to survive in harsh conditions. Compost worms can also be used to aerate soils through their tunneling. They also can act as a filter, so they are able to sequester heavy metals present in the regolith and store it in their gut. Another thing that they do is they fertilize the soil by adding nutrients in the form of worm castings. So initially, we're curious if they could even survive, and if so, if they could improve the soil quality through worm castings for plant growth. So during this preliminary research, Acenia fedida, red wiggler worm, was used and introduced into 3 different worm beds. A pH-neutral desert silver sand was used as the earth control, along with lunar highland simulant, LHS1, and Martian global simulant, MGS1. Since compost worms can eat decaying plant matter and animal waste on Earth, Acenia fedida consumed hot composted animal manure as their food, and this was chosen as a proxy for future astronaut waste. Initially, a 1-to-1 ratio by volume was used for the worm bedding, and the worms were fed, watered, and aerated once a week. After 2 months of the worms living in the desired compost, we noticed that Acenia fedida living in lunar highland simulant actually thrived compared to Martian worms. In fact, the LHS1 worms proved to survive and reproduce after 60 days. The 60-day mark is a good indicator that red wigglers are content with this environment. But unlike this, only a few survived in the 12-week-long experiment in MGS1. So besides this, after the 12-week worm regolith interaction, radish seeds were planted, germinating in 3 days, and they were harvested on the 30-day mark. And all 3 vermicomposts produced 2 fully developed radishes. As for the Martian simulant, we didn't want to give up on using the Martian global, so it was attempted again. We didn't see the survivability of the worms like we saw in LHS1, so we thought they were something in the MGS that the worms just couldn't tolerate. So a batch of Martian global simulant was produced, excluding magnesium sulfate. We were curious if the higher amount of salt content was the underlying issue, and it turned out that the removal of epsomite heavily played a factor in the worm's survivability. So in finding, the fertilized conditioned regolith simulant can be used to improve plant growth in lunar soil, as well as complement the plant life cycle. And currently, studies are being conducted to analyze the soil each week from the corresponding vermicompost, as well as the microbial content in the gut of the Acenia fedida. This kind of research enables sustainable future habitation on the moon and other planets. As we know, the Artemis missions are going to the moon for long-term stay and are happening now. So it's very important to utilize in situ resources to form a sustainable agricultural practice for potential Moon or Mars base. So with this, we just need your help and expertise in agriculture to make all this possible. Andrew, that is all. Thank you for listening.